On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're looking at this very much uneventful summer. We'll talk about that and what to predict. We're going to talk about predictions as well. Way too early to tell. We'll talk about that. But first, let's play that music.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Tengu. Thank you for joining me and making us your first listen of the day. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're going to discuss the weird phenomenon that is the NHL offseason, going from a lot of news and moves and all of that, and then nothing really till training camp. We'll talk about that, as well as looking forward towards our way too early to tell predictions. We'll talk about that with the Lightning. Where do they stand? What do we expect out of them going forward into the upcoming season? And so, talking about the NHL offseason, it's one of those things that I think that, for me personally, and let me know in the comments below if you feel the same way. I would love to kind of get a gauge on, how everybody else feels about this, because I really think that it is something that when you look at the game of hockey, we always talk about, whether it be on here or when Chris and I were hosting Locked On NHL, we kind of always talked about it, sometimes even complained about it, how really the NHL offseason, when maybe we're doing the game a little bit of a disjustice by maybe just comparing it to the other sports, baseball, football, basketball. You always have constant chatter really throughout the course of the offseason. And, one can make the argument, well, listen, those games, those sports are just simply bigger in America and North America in general, and that's why that they draw billions of dollars a year in revenue, and that's why the players have such high salaries compared to the NHL, where really the if you were to compare the salary of the highest paid player in the league, I think it's Tyler Seguin maybe, or somebody else, where I believe it was at 11.5, maybe even 12. Or I think it was maybe McDavid even. But when you look at those salaries, that's in baseball, basketball, especially football, especially baseball, really. Those are very much maybe lower mid-level to low salary totals. And not saying that because the players get paid less significantly compared to other sports, that's the reason why. But no, I just feel like it's one of those things where maybe the league doesn't do a good enough job. It almost feels like the NHL, to a certain extent, almost just rushes into the offseason. I'm talking about, we get the Stanley Cup final over, and then maybe you get those 2-3 days, maybe even a little bit less, depending on who the Stanley Cup champion is, where it's really televised and really publicized across the NHL network, the websites, everything, social media. And then you get the NHL draft, and that's it. That's really much it. You get maybe free agency, and as we all know, free agency hasn't really been that all exciting. If we're really going to pinpoint the most exciting parts of the NHL season, it's really the trade deadline, the Stanley Cup playoffs, and that's pretty much it. And maybe opening night, one could say that I feel like in recent years, maybe opening night has kind of lost its luster. I know when I was working at NHL.com, opening night was just like, it was almost like, to a certain extent, at least from the content point of view, it was more so like the night at the Oscars, almost in a way. Like you were going to wait on every single thing. You don't want to miss a second of what the action or what was going to happen or what was going to be said. And maybe that's just the workplace. Maybe that was the reason why. But I feel like we need, as maybe an NHL community or even the league in general, I think maybe the league in general really needs to figure this out, is to keep that constant excitement year round. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say what the league should do A through Z, but I think that maybe it starts with the draft, kind of like how I listed off, like the league kind of rushes more towards into the offseason right after the Stanley Cup final. I believe, if I remember my dates correctly, Stanley Cup final, the last game I think was maybe the second to last week or the last week of June. And then you get into the offseason. The draft, I believe, was around the second week of June. Free agency a week or two later. And that's it. And, I'm sitting here on July 25th. And really, if it wasn't for Patrice Bergeron retiring today, which, grand scheme of things, I mean, if we're looking at a player of his caliber retiring in other sports, obviously that's everywhere. I guarantee you ESPN is not even going to report this. Maybe it'll be like, if anything, it would be kind of a, by the way, Bruins center and captain Patrice Bergeron retired after 19 years. And that's pretty much what you're going to get. And I think that Gary Bettman and the powers that be that surround him really need to look at maybe the offseason as kind of a place to where they could fill in some holes. And I'm not saying, extend the season or maybe push free agency a little bit back. No, because what is that really going to accomplish? Really not much, but I think that the PR department, at least for the league itself, really needs to do a better job of grabbing or keeping hold of those fans that are relatively new to the game. And the fans I'm talking about are, and whoever is listening or watching, you might be one of those people who really hitched onto the NHL wagon during the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it may have been because of a certain team, or maybe you just saw a commercial for it and were just like, maybe this is something I should check out. And I really think that the league, because let's face it, and this is pretty much the God to honest truth. When the league, and I can speak from experience, and so can, if you ask Locked On Rangers host John Chick, who also worked with me at NHL.com, we can both tell you that really the league in general, and, this is probably not what you want to hear, but this is something that is very much true. When the league is looking at attracting new fans, or when they're thinking of ideas to get viewership up or whatever the case may be, or just promote the league, they're looking at new fans. They don't give a crap about the existing ones, because they know all of us are going to come back regardless of what's going to happen year in, year out, and then on a nightly basis. That's just the way it is. But from maybe just a rational point of view, when we look at the new listeners or the new, viewership, the new fandom that came on during the NHL Stanley Cup playoff, after these fans cool their heels, and maybe, I'm sure there was a lot of fans that joined the Golden Knights bandwagon this offseason, and I'm sure there was a lot of fans, and I don't mind if you're a bandwagon fan or not. I'm sure there was a lot of Lightning fans that jumped onto the bandwagon when the Lightning went back-to-back and went to a third straight Stanley Cup. My thing is that how do you keep those fans as a whole, as a league? Well, I can tell you for certain it's not going to be draft, free agency, see you in October. Because that's really what it is. That's really what the message the league is really saying. Now, the only idea that comes to mind, and let me in the comments below what you think is the right course of action for the NHL to kind of make things more exciting year round. Let me know in the comments below, because the idea that comes to mind as of now to where we could maybe make things a little bit more exciting is probably going to be from maybe having some sort of showcase of all the players that were drafted in the previous draft. I think that would be something that would generate a little bit more excitement. It would also be something that would be a little bit different. I think it's something that maybe a lot of teams probably wouldn't want to happen. I think that the Chicago Blackhawks wouldn't be really excited about. They just drafted their best prospect, or one of the best players really, to come into the draft since Connor McDavid, and have him play in a meaningless game and risk the possibility of getting hurt. Now, that is something that the league is going to have to really go through, maybe jump through some hoops with the Players Association. And we both know, if we know anything about the Players Association, that they're probably going to want some sort of money compensation in return, which we both know the league is not going to go for that. So you could probably scratch that idea right away out the door, kick it out the door. But let me know in the comments below what you think. I think, maybe I'm just like overreacting. Maybe I'm looking at this as kind of something that, I don't know. I think the league needs to do something at least to generate some sort of buzz to where the average sports person that does not follow hockey, or even follows hockey very casual, is going to wake up one day, get a commercial, because we both know commercials for the NHL season aren't going to drop until probably a week or two before opening night. So, and we know that the NFL doesn't get the same treatment. They get better promotion. So does Major League Baseball. So does the NBA. Maybe it's something that they have to do at ESPN, because as we all know, ESPN has not done really a good job, outside of commentating the games. And even then, we could even say that's been a little bit suspect. Maybe ESPN needs to do a better job of going in with their agreement. Now, I don't know the exact lines and wordage that was involved in that agreement between the NHL and ESPN, but I think we could all agree that the ESPN maybe needs to do a little bit more promotion. Not even promotion, but just on their regular shows, whether it be Get Up or whatever. I don't watch ESPN anymore because it's an absolute joke. But whatever shows they have, talk shows that they have, I think there needs to be some sort of discussion throughout the course of the summer to keep that, the NHL is still a thing in the mind of the casual sports fan. Let me know what you would have in mind. I would love to hear all your suggestions for that. So coming up in just a bit, we're going to talk about predictions, mainly for the Tampa Bay Lightning. How do we think they're going to do this year? Who do we expect to have a good season, and who do we expect to maybe improve from their disappointing season? We'll talk about all of that and more coming up. But first, I want to talk about our sponsor today, and that is our friends over at Athletic Greens. Now, if you haven't heard of Athletic Greens, listen, they are the most healthiest daily supplement on the market today. Now, I start my morning off with this. It's wedding season right now, and it's, especially with my job, it's hard to get into the gym. So eating right and taking the right supplements for me is the best thing I could do to keep myself in shape. Now, all great athletes have one thing in common: they take care of their bodies. Don't you want to be like the great athletes? And a huge part of that starts with optimizing whole body health. A lot of them also drink AG1. That is why I'm a huge fan. And with every daily serving, I'm setting myself up for success with 75 high-quality ingredients that give me key nutrients and support energy, focus, and strength. It's a micro habit that delivers macro benefits and helps just about everybody take care of their health every single day. So what you got to do right now, it's a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine. Then try Athletic Greens 1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs of Athletic Green 1 with your first purchase. All you have to do is go to athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. That's drinkathleticgreens1.com/NHL Network. Check it out. So moving on to our following topic of conversation here in this very quiet NHL offseason. And if you want to continue following along our talk as we continue to kind of figure out where this Lightning team is going to be, what they're going to look like, how do we feel about certain players, new and old, that are part of this team heading into the 23-24 season, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We are available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We are also available on YouTube. Like I've been talking about pretty much, I think, since the end of the playoffs, at least for the Lightning. As our subscription number goes up, what we're going to do is once we hit that 1,000 mark on YouTube, we'll be giving away a free, and it's free. All you have to do is hit the subscribe button, a free Vinny Lecavalier signed puck with the old school Lightning logo and all. You will automatically be entered into a raffle for that. So all you got to do is be subscribed to the YouTube channel and hit that notification button, because we'll be dropping videos about that, about information, and just, reminding you as we get closer, ever closer to that coveted 1,000 mark on YouTube. So go ahead and do that. So this offseason for the Lightning, we kind of all knew it was going to be a very difficult season. I think a lot of us can agree that Alex Killorn coming back was not something that was probably either realistic or even remotely in the cards for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I do like what they did for the most part, free agency, signing Connor Sherry, really adding that depth and also adding a forward who's been there before. I think that's one of the most important things that the Lightning needed to do, whether it was via trade or in the free agent market, was kind of whether or not Killorn was going to come back. You want to add somebody else for the right price, of course, to come in and to be a leader and to also have that multifaceted game. And Connor Sherry is that guy. Like we all know, if you don't know, he was part of those Stanley Cup winning Penguins teams. I believe he was also part of those. Yeah, he was part of those back-to-back teams as well that won. So you got a guy right there who knows what to do, whether it be in the middle of the season when nothing is working, kind of knows how to get things started, knows what's right, knows how to set the tone, as well as once the playoffs roll around, which I am still kind of tentative to predict that will be a sure thing for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Because when you look at the Eastern Conference in the NHL, I think it's gotten better. I think not only, even if the teams haven't really haven't really signed or added a whole bunch of good pieces, I still think that a lot of the teams in the East that were already tough, like Carolina, like New Jersey, like the Rangers, the Islanders, Florida, those teams, that's one more year, and a lot of those teams do have young pieces. Those are teams that are getting better with experience. And I kind of hinted about this, especially with the division when we've spoken about it this offseason, especially with Buffalo and Detroit. Even if, and this was before, I believe, the Alex DeBrincat trade that sent him from Ottawa to Detroit. I think this is something that really, I think we could all agree Lightning fans were very wary about. I think this is something that when we talk about the Lightning's window, their championship window being open, and for how long is that going to be, I think you have to view it as that way. And not just at the Atlantic Division, but the entire Eastern Conference. Because at the end of the day, as these teams in the Atlantic Division get better and better, or just continue to grow and continue to produce, we saw it with Buffalo. They had a very good season last year for them. They're only going to get better unless some catastrophic thing happens or they take a massive step backwards, which I think we can all agree isn't something that is going to happen. And then you look at Detroit, another team who I think is ready to make that push this year, alongside with regular divisional foes like Florida. Boston, I think, is a question mark. I think they're kind of in that gray area. I don't think they're going to be out of the conversation for the playoffs, but you have a lot of teams getting better, and I feel like the Lightning, to some regard, got better, if not just replaced pieces that needed to be replaced. But I think that when we look at this team, and I think anybody could say this, I think this is an easy assumption to make. When you look at especially the bottom of the roster, when you look at the bottom lines, the second line defensive pairing, the fourth line forwards lines, those are the big question marks that I think really the Lightning are going to have to not be able to play around with as much. It's going to be one of those situations where the Lightning, if they get into the first month or so, and it's just not working on that third line, that fourth line forward line, something's going to have to be done right away. Because as we all know, in today's NHL, it is fast, it is physical, and every team goes out there with a full four-line forward lines. There's really no makeup when you look at every NHL team that is successful, that is competitive, that does not have a weak spot in terms of their depth. And on paper right now, I am not confident that this Lightning team has enough depth. Having said that, they've rolled out lines like that before, and they've made absolute magic with it. Now, but when you look at going back to the championship window, it's not so much that the Lightning are not built to get to the playoffs. My issue is, and really the thing that I'm wary of, is other teams. Like I said, the Atlantic Division's getting better. Detroit, Buffalo, Florida, Toronto, Boston. I think that they are going to be a team that I still think that could make a play for that third spot, that third playoff spot in the division, as well as definitely make a play for that first or second wildcard spot. And really the question, which unfortunately we can't answer now, is where do the Lightning fit in all this? Where are they going to be able to thrive? And I said it at the beginning of the offseason, and especially after free agency kind of quieted down. I said that really, and I think that this isn't anything against in terms of that I think this team is not good enough. I just think that the Lightning, as of now, and how they played last year, and I know we really can't compare the two because the roster is significantly different. The players are going to be significantly fresher as the season goes on. But I said it, I believe that this team was an 85 to 90 point team. Now, I said I was leaning more towards the 85 point mark, but that is more so if we see the same Andrei Vasilevsky. Now, having some time to think about it, I'm kind of leaning towards 90, 95, which I think is a good, happy medium. I think that is a good spot for the Lightning to aim for because, like I said, Detroit's getting better. Buffalo, I think just all they need is goaltending, and they could easily challenge for a top 3 spot in this division. The huge question mark, of course, is going to be Boston, like I'm going to repeatedly talk about throughout the course of the season until we see some sort of definitive answer in terms of what kind of team that's going to be. So when you look at the Eastern Conference as a whole and Tampa Bay, if you're going to make a prediction like I am about to right now, I'm not going to use my normal answer like I have in past off seasons. But I will say that this Lightning team on their best day will challenge for that third spot in the division. And on their worst day will be a point or two outside of the second wild card spot in the East. Because, and I know I'm already going to get a lot of flack for this, because when you look at the Eastern Conference, there's a lot of good teams, and then there's also other teams that I'm sure Lightning fans will look at and be like, really? The Lightning could potentially be in this class? No, I think Florida's going to be very good. I think Pittsburgh will kind of revamp a little bit. I think that they really want to get back into the playoffs after missing last year. You only have so many years left of Malkin and Ovechkin. Malkin and Crosby. I think that Washington will be slightly better. I don't think that they are going to be an 85-point team. I don't think that they're necessarily going to be an 80-point team either, is where they how many points they accumulated last year. Philadelphia is one of those teams I say on a yearly basis that I firmly believe that they have the names, they have the players, they just need to figure it out. They have the personnel to be one of the better teams. I think really what it comes down to is coaching, front office moves, and temperament. I don't know necessarily if John Tortorella is going to be the right fit there, but we will definitely continue to keep an eye on that. But real quick, where the Lightning fit into all this, I think that they are going to keep up for the most part. They're going to keep up with a New York, with a Florida, with a Toronto. I think that they keep up with that, but I don't think that when you go, and you will definitely see it as the season progresses, when you see the matchup against New Jersey and Carolina, those are games where they're going to get outclassed. I'm sorry. But when I look at the East as a whole, Carolina and New Jersey are the class of the East, the high class. And I think that the Lightning could be a middle of the pack team, which is, I think, perfect for them. And I think that really that's where Lightning fans need to realistically look at them. If the Lightning finish 6th overall in the East, I don't even look at it as the division kind of thing, because, I prefer to look to the grand scheme of things as where they finish in the conference rather than where they finish in the division. Because as we all know, as long as you get into the playoffs, you could go anywhere. I mean, we saw it with Florida, wild card team goes to the Stanley Cup final. So I think that's where we got to look at it. I think the Lightning need to build upon that as the season goes on. Let me know in the comments below what you think, because that's where I think the Lightning are going to be. I think they're a middle of the pack team, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think that when you look at certain players on this team, I know we didn't really get around to it, so we will talk about that in the next episode, but I think that really it depends on their depth players. I think that we're going to also need to see a lot more production from the third line this year. I think we're going to need to see a lot more production from the defensive core this year, and a lot more staunchy defense as well. So we'll talk about that as the offseason moves on and we get ever closer to the new season. So wrapping things up on the show today, let me know in the comments below what you think. I know this is going to maybe having a lot of eyes to cause a lot of eyes to roll, and that's perfectly fine. Listen, I just think that we need to walk into the season with some sort of measured expectations. To all of you saying, and I have seen it, so don't tell me that this is not a thing, but there are Lightning fans that are saying that we are going to go back to the Stanley Cup final. If that happens, that's phenomenal. That's great. The boys are back. But let's worry about the regular season, because I feel like that's something that, all right, it was one thing to say that after they won 2 in a row. It was another to say that last year, which I wasn't really crazy about that whole mindset either. But at times in games, that's kind of like what it felt like when they were going through these stretches where it was just like, listen, we're playing bad now, but as long as we get it together once the real games start. No real games. Listen, if you don't get it together now, you may not be able to play in the real games. And like I stated during the regular season, if the Islanders didn't just completely screw the pooch throughout the course of the season, the Lightning could have and Florida kind of fell asleep at the wheel there to begin the season. If those two teams kind of played up to their potential, what we saw in previous years, I believe I mentioned it back in February when the Lightning were not playing very well. We were having the conversation then about them possibly missing the playoffs. And that is something that I think the mindset needs to change on with this franchise. And I hope we see it in the first couple of weeks, especially the first couple of months of the NHL season. Because if we go into this season with the mindset, let's just get into the playoffs and go from there. I look at it two ways. I know there's some teams that barely creep into the playoffs and turn it on from there, as we've seen in past years. But the Lightning, I don't feel, are like one of those teams. They aren't one of those teams that are kind of an unknown, a kind of out of the woodworks kind of team. No, plus that's not how they're constructed. They're not the kind of team that is able to do that. If how their performance was early on in games this year was any indicator, they need to be good from night one on. Now, if it turns out, if it comes down to games not going their way because they just aren't able to compete with certain teams on certain nights, that is fine. I will take that over blowing games to low-level teams like the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Montreal Canadiens and playing tight, very good games against Vegas and Florida and Carolina. Okay, so I think that it all starts at the end of the day with the mindset that this team has. So I'm very curious to see, after having a very restful offseason, what is said as training camps open, as players come back to work out. And I mean, they're already working out, but as they come to work out as a team, the words and the demeanor and the mindset that is coming from these players coming into a season that I think is very, very important for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So we'll keep an eye on that. And as always, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. And you can follow us on our social media pages at @LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. And we'll be back to talk more Lightning offseason tomorrow. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.